my name is Joseph Hills. I am an ELT consultant with eFuture. I've been here for about 6 months now. The time has been flying. So today I will be talking to you about reading class and how to maximize your reading skill or your reading activities and reading skills that you teach in your class. Now, just before I dive into all of this, I do want to say that I'm going to be showing you a couple of examples from different books and different book series that we have here. But all of the activities that I show you, even if it's if the example comes from one book, all of these activities are meant to be used with any level for any reading series. So if I show you one from my first reading or my best reading, it can be used for smart reading or for Reading Town even. So all of these activities are meant to be useful for any level and any class size. Keep that in mind. I sometimes get questions from people where they're like, oh, what is this? Which activity works best for this level? But really, for all of these activities, you should be able to use it for any level that you teach, because most teachers I know teach multiple levels, and they will want to have, instead of planning 3 completely different lessons, you can probably level up or level down activities as you see fit. So that's just kind of a preface to this PowerPoint and this presentation. Now our plan today is to just introduce a couple of the books very briefly, and we'll talk about reading methodology. And while we're doing that, we're going to look at some games and activities as well. These things are going to be kind of woven together. So it's not just going to be this, then this. So we'll kind of jump around a little bit, but hopefully it makes sense to you. Now, the books that I'm going to be talking about today and showing you examples from start with our My Reading series, but we'll talk a little bit about Smart Reading. I'm not going to be talking too much about Reading Town, but again, like I said, most of the examples and activities here can be used in that series as well. This is just a basic flow of these books, starting all the way down at the bottom with our lowest level, which is the My Phonics reading books, all the way up to Reading Town, which is the beginning of our secondary level books. So pre-A1 all the way up through A2 here. All of these books do have a bit of the My First Reading, Next Reading, and Best Reading are very continuous and flow into each other. Smart Reading, which is new, does overlap with all of these books, but it does also serve as a bridge. So the Smart Reading book 6, or level 6 will bridge My Best Reading to Reading Town. But Smart Reading will overlap with My Best Reading, My Next Reading, and My First Reading. So here's a better visual example of that. You can see the levels. Smart Reading has 6 levels. My Phonics reading is 1 level with 3 books. And then My First Reading, My Next Reading, My Best Reading, they're all leveled as such. So you can see that there's going to be a lot of overlap, which is why activities will also work together, because different books, but similar levels, you're going to be using the same ideas. Okay, so let's take a look at a very basic layout of these books. We're just going to start here with My First Reading. Basically, this is the layout for a unit. This is unit 5 here. You have a 4-page spread. And on the first 2 pages of the unit, you will have pretty much all of your basic targets that you're going to use. So you'll see your warm-up questions, your keywords, the story, and some illustration questions as well, some early comprehension questions. And then on the final 2 pages, you'll have more reading comprehension questions, word practice, and language experimentation, and things like graphic organizers, or little wrap-up writing assignments, things like that. It's very, very simple, basic writing at this level. But as we progress up through My Next Reading, you can see that it's pretty much the same structure. Again, you have vocabulary here, you have your story, you have some comprehension questions, and then again, some comprehension questions over here, and a graphic organizer vocabulary check. The only difference is that the challenge is a little bit higher. So you have a few more vocabulary words, the stories are a little bit longer, things of that nature. Then with My Best Reading, you have an extra page. So the keywords, the vocabulary words, there's a bit more expansion there, where we move, you have the keyword introductions and then some vocab practice before you read the story, as well as a main page here that has a kind of a cover talk and comprehension or topic question that you can use to get your students engaged with the story. And then, of course, it's going to be a little bit longer because the stories themselves are longer. So here, this story is spread over 2 pages. It looks like this so that you can break it up into pieces if you need to. You don't have to read the whole story all at once. You can do the first half and then take a break, or break it up over a series of lessons. It's up to you, really. These lessons are very customizable to suit your needs. And then, but again, you'll still see comprehension questions, some graphic organizers, things like that. For the My Reading series, we have some worksheets and word or review tests that you can download as well. These are all available for you. You can get them through eSmartClass. And these, again, are just great things to help boost and provide extra review for your students if they need it. You can also use these for additional homework if you want as well, to go along with the workbooks. But with Smart Reading, which is our new series, I want to give you the opportunity here to take a look at a quick unit, very, very basically. But what similarities do you notice between Smart Reading and the My Reading series? You can write what you can see in the chat. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to write those out, take a look at these pages. So what do you notice is similar about Smart Reading and My Reading? Yes, Robert, the structure is the same. You have the same first two pages with a story, some pictures, vocab, and a question. So yeah, the structure is, again, the same. The format works. The exercises also, yes. They're pretty similar. You have comprehension questions. You have some writing activities. There is a little difference in the word practice and the way it's formatted, but the basic structure is pretty much the same. So if you use the My Reading series before and you then transition to Smart Reading, you'll be pretty familiar with how to use the book and how it's functioned. So yeah, very good. That's pretty much the quick rundown there. Now with the Smart Reading series, we also have an additional word book. So there is additional vocabulary practice in a book itself. And this is included with it's separate from the workbook, but it is included with all of as a component. So you have these unit practices where you can do additional vocabulary practice here for each unit. But again, just like My Reading, you have these other downloadable worksheets like a pattern worksheet or passage extension. So these are all, again, similar to what we have with the My Reading series. So you can transition pretty easily. Okay, so now let's talk about methodology. And again, this is just going to cover how to teach a reading class. So all of my examples will come from the different series, but this is just kind of an umbrella discussion on methodology here. So the big takeaways. When you are teaching a reading class, the textbook is the foundation. The story is the foundation. But if you are only using the textbook, you're only using the workbook, using the textbook at home or in school and the workbook as homework, your students are missing huge learning opportunities. So it's best to expand on the textbook whenever you can, because you want to be able to allow the students to engage and have fun with what they're working with. And they can't really do that if they're just burning through comprehension questions after reading a story. They'll learn, but it won't be as enjoyable, and it won't be as complete and as fleshed out. So you want to use the textbook as your foundation. All the knowledge or information that you need to teach is in the book, but then you can go out from there and expand. Each section of the text, as I mentioned before, is flexible and designed in a way for you as the teacher to adapt what you need for your students to best help your students. So you don't have to follow a strict lesson plan for each lesson. We make suggestions for how to run through the lessons and how much time each lesson should take. But if you have a system for your school or for your classrooms, or you have students with a very specific need, you can adapt the book to fit the needs of your students. It shouldn't be the other way, where the students have to adapt to the book. But that also means that the teacher needs to be flexible as well. Always plan, but be willing to make changes to your plan at the drop of a hat. That's really important, because your students might throw you a curveball where you think they can do this activity. It'll be very useful for them. They'll really enjoy it. And then it turns out the key concepts that are involved in that activity, they're struggling with. And so you have to then pivot and go back to explaining and teaching those key concepts again before you can do that activity. So being flexible in the classroom is one of the most important things a teacher can do. And then, of course, reading classes shouldn't be silent. Reading classes, like I'm sure some of you are familiar with sustained silent reading. And this is a very useful skill and activity to do in class, but reading classes shouldn't be silent the entire time. You want to make sure that you give your students ample time to talk to each other. And you can do that in a myriad of ways. So before I even continue with all that, and I want to just kind of gauge what you guys do with your reading classes. So how do you get your students to communicate with each other in your reading classes, even with very young learners or elementary school or middle school? What are some of the things that you know work for you in your classroom? In other words, how do you get your students to engage with each other? How do you increase talk time in a reading class? No ideas? No thoughts? Well, okay, then if we don't have any ideas about how to, oh, here we go, here's one. You let your students do role play. Yeah, role play is a great way to engage your students with the passage and let them work together. And that goes hand in hand with pair work. Yeah, so that's good. We usually do fast reading. I partner my students together and let them read as fast as they can. Okay. And when you do that, book talks, that's also good. So fast reading, when you do that, is it for do you do that for speaking practice or for reading comprehension practice? Provide separate worksheets with all the vocab from the unit and have them either write short definitions or match the words to pictures. Yeah, vocab practice is extremely important. And when you're working with the worksheets, are they working in pairs or are they working individually and then reviewing together? Asking questions about what they think it's going to be about. Yes, that's really, really useful. So those pre-reading questions, making predictions is a great, great way to engage your students. Okay, gotcha. So for the fast reading, it's after reading comprehension. I get you. I assign students to talk to their family at home using target sentences. That is fantastic. And I do hope more teachers do that, is like including the family at home is one of those sneaky, very positive skills to encourage your students to do. And it takes some communication with family sometimes, but it's a great way to get them to continue to practice at home. And usually most homes aren't going to be English fluent. And so they'll be speaking with people that are on a similar level, as opposed to speaking to a fluent teacher or a native teacher. So that's a great way for them to practice and self-correct at home and do it in a comfortable way. So yeah, that's great. Okay, so you do it as a class. Okay, great. Yeah, so these are some wonderful skills to do. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is connected to these things, but I'll see if I can help you expand it even more. Okay, so the first way to expand your activities and to make them more effective is gamification. And I'm sure you've heard this term. I've used it before, and it's a very, very popular term among the ELT world. But gamification just means that you take the worksheets and that you have, or the comprehension questions that you have, and instead of having the students just write them out, you turn them into a game. Any pages in your book, you turn them into a game. So you can gamify workbook pages, you can gamify comprehension pages, and the reason this is great is because the game itself becomes the study. It's the study and the activation of the knowledge they've already acquired. What I recommend you do whenever you gamify anything is take the answers that you want them to have or to write down or complete in their workbook or in their student book, and make those the questions in the game as well. So if you have a page of 4 or 5 comprehension questions, make sure you put those 5 questions in your game. You can add more to keep the game, to make the game longer if you want, but take the questions from the book, play them as a game, so the students are interacting, they're having more fun with it, and then when they return to the book, those questions, those comprehension questions, are more review as opposed to actual study. Especially in a reading class, when you're asking comprehension questions, if they have the book right in front of them, students will often just flip to the story and look for the answer and then tell you. But when you play a game, the book becomes a bit of a distraction. And so you usually close the books during the game, and then they have to go more from memory. And that's more useful. But you can also incorporate other things. You can review previous lessons, you can incorporate vocabulary, and it's actually in the long run saves time, because the game takes up your study and activate phases of your class, and then your comprehension pages just become review, which you don't necessarily have to do in class. You can just assign them for homework because the students will already have the information for them. With gamification though, make sure you keep your games simple so you can transition in and out of them quickly. Of course, the big one in a reading class methodology is creating student speaking opportunities. And you can do this in a whole host of ways. So have students read to each other. Peer review work before reviewing answers as a class. So if they are answering comprehension questions in their book, have them check each other's work first and then review as a class. Make teams, just for anything, reading teams or for games or for any, like even peer review, just put them into teams and have them in teams that they are familiar with. You can rotate them as well, which is great to increase the interactions among classmates. And then play games where the students need to communicate with each other instead of the teacher. So there are a lot of games that teachers will play where they are the focus. They'll ask a question and then a student will have to answer a question to get some portion of the game completed. But you can change that by having the students interact with each other to find the answers and complete the game. Okay, so let's talk about the pre-reading stage of a reading class. Now, in a reading class, the way I'm going to be talking about this is with a pre-reading stage, a during reading stage, and a post-reading stage. So those are the three parts of a reading class that I'm breaking this lesson into, or this presentation into. Now, the first part of a pre-reading class is, of course, the warm-up, which we'll talk about in a moment. But your methodology here, we have the planning perspective and the learning perspective. First, you have, when you're planning your pre-reading section of the class, you want to make sure that your instructions are simple. You want to make sure that the pre-reading section is repeatable without being repetitive. Meaning that the system is going to be, you can use the system over and over and over so that the students are familiar with it. That makes starting your class just so much easier. Have a system in place where your students know exactly what is going to happen on a given day. And that means that you won't have to take a lot of time to explain things before you get into the actual lesson. Saves a whole lot of time. And what I mean by repeatable without being repetitive, you're being repeatable, but you're changing the information that they're working with. So it doesn't get boring. It doesn't get so that they just know exactly what to do and then they can zone out. Have a structure, keep that structure, change the information within that structure. And then, of course, when you're planning your pre-reading stage, make sure that it works online and offline. That's something that we have to be conscious of now, because who knows what happens. Maybe there will be a sudden outbreak of COVID in your classroom, and suddenly you have to switch to online classes. Or if you are in a school that's still using a hybrid system where some days the kids are in class and some days they're out of class, when you can establish all of the basic information before they get into the story in a clear way. This can be done online and offline. That means that once you're in an online setting, they can go and do more by themselves. So your pre-reading warm-ups and for early information should be something that you can communicate via a webcam just as well as you could in class, in person. So that's just something that we have to think about these days. And from a learning perspective, you want to reinforce cognitive development. So you want your students to be able to think about what they're reading before they start reading. You want them to start making predictions and things like that. You want to get them to connect it to their daily lives. Any pre-reading activities should be low stakes, trial and error. It's not important that they are correct. It's that they are making an attempt to participate and to engage with what they're about to read. And then, of course, get students moving. It's a great way to get students to transition from the out-of-class experience to the in-class experience, because maybe you have a class that they're coming after lunch or after recess or to their first class of the day. and they still got a lot of energy. Use that energy to get them excited for the activity. So get them moving, but in a way that you can control. And eventually, from the learning perspective, your pre-reading system, if it is repeatable, can become student-led, where you can give simple instructions and then have the students take over. And that's why we want to be repeatable with our system. So let's talk about this warm-up very quickly. The warm-up is so important. So don't ignore your warm-up, and spend some quality time when you do your warm-up. But always provide an objective. That's very, very important. Your objective is different from your plan. You're not going to say, today we're going to read this page, and this page, and then we'll answer these questions. That is not an objective. That is a plan or an outline. Your objective is, by the end of the class, your students will be able to do blank. And put that on the board so that they know what they're supposed to accomplish, and so that you can also refer back to it throughout the class in case you get off track. Like I said, start your class in the same way. And very, very important, never introduce anything new in your warm-up. Your warm-up is to review what they learned in their previous lessons. It's to check what the students already know so that you can prepare the rest of the lesson in a more appropriate way. And then, of course, revisit your warm-up in your wrap-up. So here we have a page from my phonics reading. So these are for very, very early readers. You have very, very simple things that you're going to go through. And I have numbers here for what you would do, the order or what I would do in a warm-up. So what's number 1? I have 1 in this box here, the big box. I am looking at the pictures. So the first thing that I would do in a warm-up for very young learners is to just talk about the picture. And just see what language they know, and that will help them. It'll help you as well. So just see what they know. Talk about, you may have objectives. Maybe you want to make sure to see if they can eventually identify our key vocabulary before. But if they don't know the words for father, mother, brother, and sister, that's okay. Maybe they'll recognize that they're playing a game, or that they're doing something together, or that they're in the living room. There are many, many different ways to go about your picture talk, and the outcomes are all going to be useful as long as your students are speaking. Then from there, after you talk about the picture, you go to the title, because this they can just talk and conversate about, but with the title, they actually have to read something. So you would read the title together, but when you do that, connect the words in the title to the picture. So I love my family. You can talk about now, well, we know that we have this word here, family. So who do you think is in the family? These 4 people. Ask those questions to get them to connect the title to the picture. So yeah, I usually call it a cover talk or a picture talk, depending on the format that you have. But yeah, that's the biggest part of a warm up for a reading for reading, is just talking about the pictures. And then you can, after you've established what the title is and you've talked about the pictures enough so that we know that they have you have an understanding of what they understand, you can start asking these before reading questions. But you'll notice here that the reading questions are not about the story. They're about their family. And that's very, very important, because these questions you can refer back to after they read the story and talk about how their family is similar or different to the family in the story. Or I can talk about the games that they play versus the games that are played with their family. So revisit these questions. It's labeled as a before reading question because you should address them before you read, but you should also revisit. And then I have here in an asterisk, or with an asterisk, this number 4. If you have already reviewed the vocabulary, or this vocabulary has already been introduced in a different lesson or a different day, then you can review these. But if you haven't, this would go into the study phase, and it's no longer part of your warm-up. So separate it if it's already been introduced. Okay. Now, another big part of the pre-reading is the keyword expansion. So if you haven't already reviewed the vocabulary, you want to introduce the vocabulary. And the way that I do it, especially for very young learners, is to do it as tactile vocabulary. So tactile, what does this word mean? Does anybody know? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with these. Yeah, tactile is something that you can touch or feel, or it's dealing with being able to touch, feel real things. So when I introduce vocabulary, especially for young learners, I like to have it tactile, something that they can hold. Or even in some cases, if it's safe or if it's related to the lesson, something they can smell or even eat, if you want to go that route, if you have permission to go that route. But really basic things that you can use to make your keywords tactile are, instead of just reading from the book, use flashcards, use realia. So even with a topic like family here, you can use real objects. So you can, before your class, you can tell your students, for the next class, I need you to bring in pictures of your family. That's a real object that they can then hold and they can point to and refer to. Other ways to be tactile, use TPR. Create actions with the keywords for each of the keywords. Sometimes that's not always possible, but try your best. And one thing that I like to do, if I'm having trouble finding an action for a word that's simple enough for the students, I have them create the actions. And then it can just be anything they choose. If you can see here in this my best reading example, we have radio wave as a vocabulary word. Now, I might struggle with coming up with an action to teach radio wave. So that would be clear and understandable for the students. So I would ask them to make a motion. It doesn't have to be connected to their understanding of the word yet. They just have to make a motion and make it unique so that they can remember it and use it whenever we use radio wave. So adding TPR is great. And also use different voices and tones when you teach vocabulary, especially when it's like things like father and mother, where you can change your voice to add to enhance the TPR. Another option that you can do is have your students draw their own flashcards, make their own flashcards, because the action of drawing their flashcards will also help imprint that word a little bit stronger in their memory, because it's not just speaking, it's speaking, it's visual, and it's a movement that they're all doing together. And then if you have high-level students, you can also have them write original sentences. But as you can see with my best reading, they're already doing some practice sentences, so you can expand on that as well. TPR is total physical response. Sorry, I should have mentioned that before. Total physical response. So you're incorporating the student's whole body into and connecting that to the vocabulary. So they're moving around, they're using their hands and their voice. I'm not going to go into great detail about this activity because this PowerPoint will be provided for you. I'm not going to give you a full example of this, but the Four Corners activity is with a TPR angle to it, a total physical response angle to it, is a great little vocabulary game that I like to play. So the four corners game is you put a word in each corner basically, and then you make statements, not questions. You don't ask questions. You make statements that the students have to then think about and choose the word that is connected to that statement. Now, for something like this activity where they're talking about travel, we incorporate TPR by having them use the action to move to their corner. So you would say like, oh, I'm taking a trip. I live in Seoul. I want to fly to Tokyo. Or no, you wouldn't say fly. I want to go to Tokyo. And then the students would say, the students would have to connect which way they could go to Tokyo from Seoul. So there's going to be more than one answer as well. And the students will come up with reasoning for using a taxi. They'll say, oh, you go to the airport, but then you take a taxi from the airport to get into the city, something like that. But the point is that once they walk to the corners, they're also using the TPR. So if they say airplane, they're flying to their corner, or they're using the train to their corner, something like that. So have the students use TPR as they move to the corner. So there's additional things. It's really, really fun. And watching students do this is really, really cute as well. One other thing that I like to do is contextual mapping or matching. And I do this in 3 stages. I have a picture to word matching stage, which is very, very basic. And that's just taking the flashcards and you have the picture on one side, the word on the other side, and you match them. So you have them flipped over and you do like a kind of a memory game or a matching game or something like that. So here, just a quick example, we have bird, ant, hamster, and cat. So picture to word matching, we have the picture of the bird, touch the word for bird, something like that. Very, very simple. In stage 2, you would do real life connection matching. So here I have a picture of a tree. What is the connection between tree and these words? Which words matches together? Correct, it's bird. Why is it bird? Exactly. So it's bird because birds live in trees. So you're asking the students to match the vocabulary, but you're also creating context. Birds make their nests in trees, and having them make that connection expands their understanding of what bird means. So this is the second stage of your context matching for this activity. Now, stage 3 is a little bit more challenging because it's abstract contextual matching. So I will, again, using these same 4 cards here, I will then show them this picture. Now, this is an abstract connection because they have to make a comparison. So what word, again, would go with the plane? Obviously, it's bird because birds fly, airplanes fly. So they're making that connection as well. This is really a really useful activity for very young learners because it can be sometimes very difficult to define some of those very basic words. So having them see it in different ways is quite useful because the definitions aren't necessarily going to help them, but images like this help them draw connections, and it reinforces what the word is and what it means. And then once you get into the story, they will also understand this a little bit more. Now, one thing I will caution you with is you don't want to necessarily do these 3 stages in rapid succession because it might be a little too hard. It might also be a little too boring. So, do stage 1, do some review, do stage 2 in the next class, do stage 3 in the next class, or after an activity, just as a way to break up the workbook pages or something like that. But it's great. It's helpful to review, but it also extends the life of your vocabulary lesson. Okay, let's talk about the during reading phase. And Maritza, I see your question about how we can read, how can we read with beginner students? That's what I'm going to talk about right now. So how to read with beginner students, very young students. We're going to talk about that now. So your during reading phase is typically going to flow like this. You're going to do it in 3 readings. That's what I like to do. You can probably do it in more, but your first reading will always be just to listen and to enjoy. And this is especially important for your younger students. The first reading, they should be like, I like to have them, you know, sitting in a circle, sitting around me, and I have either a big book or just a normal book, or we can watch an animation of an animated video of the story. Any of those is perfectly fine, but they're just listening and enjoying the story. They're not trying to learn anything necessarily. They're just there to enjoy the story. It's to get them excited and interested. Then the second stage is when you start reading together. And for very young learners, you can do very simple readings together. Or there's very simple activities that you can do so that they're reading and everybody is reading, but you're not overwhelming them with how much they have to read. And you do that by breaking it up into very, very bite-sized pieces. But also the teacher is still leading the reading here in the second stage. The third reading or an additional reading should be independent reading. And this doesn't even necessarily have to be in the during reading stage. You can do this in the post-reading stage as well for specific activities. We'll talk about that later. But these first two readings are the big ones for the during reading stage. So as I said, the first reading is teacher-led. Use audios and animations. The goal is just to get students interested. And my tip for this phase is to bring the story to life. And what I mean by that is if you don't have an animation or you don't have an audio that goes along with the story, read it to the students. But you know, if you have the time or the budget or the patience to do it, make it entertaining for them. You can dress up as one of the characters. If you have a co-teacher that can help you, doing a puppet show, like shadow puppets, is a great way to tell the story to them. Use voices, just simple voices for each of the characters. That's another great way to bring the story to life. Again, the students are not looking at the words at this stage. They're just listening. So they don't need the book there if you want to do the puppet show or whatever. But those ways, it makes the story more accessible to the students. And that's really, really important. During the second reading, you can do plot-based comprehension. And the way you would do this is through think-alouds. So as you read maybe a sentence or a page, and then as the teacher, you ask a question almost as if you're talking to yourself. You're like, oh, where is the main character? Something like that. You're almost like thinking through the story. It gets the students to kind of get into that pattern as well. So they'll start thinking about what it is they're reading. Do a lot of picture to text connections. You're going to have images with these stories. So talk about how the pictures relate to the story. Ask the students, again, what do you see here? Who is the main character? Which of these characters in the picture is the main character? And then ask opinions. So read a little bit and then ask the students, is this what you would do? Or how do you think how does the character make you feel? Or how do you think the character feels? Things like that. Ask their opinions. It's not going to be, it doesn't have to be correct. It's just to get them to engage and demonstrate that they can comprehend something without asking formal comprehension questions. So the goal here is to check for comprehension of the story as you read along, and to check for reading fluency. With your beginner learners, there's going to be a very small amount of reading fluency at this stage. That's okay. That's why we reread the story over and over, because that's where they will build their fluency. And then, of course, the tip that I use in this, that I would recommend in this phase, is to connect the comprehension questions to the student's feelings. So if the student can see themselves in the story, it helps them engage a little bit better. So ask them, like, how would you feel if this happened in the story? Something like that. So with this story here, this is a higher level story. This story here, how would you bring this story to life if you're reading it for the first time? So we're going through our first reading here. You are the teacher, you're reading the story, or you're playing an audio of the story. How would you bring this story to life? If you can quickly scan the information to see that this story is about inventions, and that there are two inventions that they talk about specifically: the light bulb and the microwave oven. So how would you bring this to life? I'll give you one example. If you have other examples, you can share them in the chat. But in the effort to save time, my example would be, when you read the story, bring in a microwave to melt chocolate, which is something that is talked about in the story, or to make popcorn. That's a practical example of what a microwave does, and it helps show what the radio waves do. So, and it helps explain how radio waves were discovered through all of this, or their uses through all of this. So, bring the story to life using real objects. Now, for a second reading, how would you connect comprehension and feeling? Again, feel free to share your answers in the chat, and I will address them as they come in. But for me, I would ask the students about their favorite foods that they make with microwaves, or ask them what they are allowed to cook in a microwave, things that they shouldn't cook in a microwave. Any of those things are very useful because it connects them to the story. So these are just two ideas to go along with the tips I used about feelings and bringing the story to life. So I hope these are helpful. But there are so many different ways that you can bring a story to life. This is nonfiction, which makes it a little bit harder, and that's why I chose this. With fiction, it's a lot easier to bring a story to life because you have characters, there's a plot, but with nonfiction, it's more informative. Okay, now, one other thing that I want to talk about during reading phase is the types of questions that you should be asking. Part of your planning should be having a list of questions that you want to ask during the story. It's very, very difficult to come up with questions on the fly when you have students yelling out their own opinions on different things, and it can be difficult to follow up on all those. So have a couple of questions written out before you're ready to go. And then make sure you keep your questions level appropriate as well. So you really need to, you can't ask too complicated of a question to a young learner. But the 7 types of questions are really, really helpful in identifying what you should ask. And I have a ball here, which I'll explain in just a moment. So the basic questions that we generally ask are called recalling facts. And this is just very, very simple plot-based questions. Who is the main character? What is the setting? Where does the character live? What does the character do? Things like that. So those basic recalling facts questions. These are the simplest questions that you can ask. main ideas are a little bit more complex because they deal with the whole story, but it's like you can ask things about like what is the lesson in the story, or what is, like, for nonfiction, what is the main, what are we talking about? So with that last story, it's what is the story about? It's about inventions. What is an invention? It's something new that people make. Things like that. These next two, drawing conclusions and making inferences, are a bit more challenging, but they are different. They sound similar, but they're different. A drawing conclusion question is a question where the students can go into the story and find the answer. An inference question is where they have to use the story to understand a greater concept, a more abstract concept, but the specific answer itself will not come from the story. Both of these are useful because they expand on the ideas and the concepts of the story, but they're higher level. So for a very young learner class, I would probably not be asking these questions. I would be really sticking with recalling facts and main ideas. Author's purpose. Things like, why did the author write this story? Or what does the author want to talk? Why does the author want to talk about inventions? Why does the author want to talk about microwaves? Things like that. Again, that's a bit of a higher level question, but it's one that's still useful. A text evidence question is asking for an answer that comes directly as a quote from the story, or it uses a quote that the students have to then break down and explain. So this is more of a comprehension question, more so than that you would use later, but it's still very, very useful. And then recalling negative facts, obviously, this is asking things that do not happen in a story. And this is usually a multiple choice question, but it's not. They're still useful to use at times because it also catches your students off guard. If you want to make sure that they're actually listening and they're not just going, yes, 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 you want to make sure that if you use a negative question, they have to understand that this didn't happen in the story. Now, when I said plan questions and plan questions using these different styles of questions, one of the ways that I do that is I actually take a ball like this, and actually a soccer ball is even better, like one of those old school soccer balls that has the hexagons patches. And I either will take a Sharpie and just write the questions on the ball if they're general questions like who is the main character, what is the lesson of the story, things like that you can ask for any story. You can just write those on the ball. Or you can take sticky notes or pieces of paper and tape them to the ball. Write questions on the ball, like where does Michael go? Something like that if it's specific to the story. And you use the ball to ask the questions so that you are not asking the questions. Basically, you take the ball and you toss it to a student, and whatever question is on top of the ball is the question that they have to answer. So it's completely random. And then that student, after they answer their question and you've talked about it, they then toss the ball to another student, and whatever question's on top, they answer that question. If it's the same question, they can still answer it. It's okay because that's additional review. So this is just a quick activity that helps make those comprehension questions as you read or just as you just finish a reading a little bit more engaging. Okay, I have just enough time to get through the post-reading. So the post-reading is these comprehension pages that we have here. So you see we have our comprehension questions, our word practice, our graphic organizers. These things are all very useful, all very important. But if you remember from the beginning of the lesson, I said you should do what? Gamify these pages. So again, this is an example from Smart Reading. Same thing, gamify these pages so that the students are practicing with them before they actually go into their books. So from a planning perspective, remember to keep the bookwork as the review. So game first, then bookwork for review. Make sure your games and make sure your questions and your prompts are level appropriate. And then also very, very important in post-reading discussions and games and activities, make sure you account for who your dominant students are and who your shy learners are. Because the dominant students are going to take over the class, they're going to give all of the answers, and you're not going to be able to see what the shy learners know as well. So keep that in mind when you're asking these questions and when you're playing these games. Divide students based on their confidence if you need to. Aim for student-led activities that the teacher can manage, where you can walk around and observe the students. But this is something that doesn't have to be immediate. You're not going to do this day one, but you want to eventually get to that stage. And then, of course, make sure you have a clear transition in and out of your activities. So if you read the story, make sure there's a transition from the story into the game, and make sure the game then transitions to the comprehension questions in your book. It shouldn't be very random. From the learning perspective, you want your learners to increase their communication, increase the amount of reading that they're doing in class, encourage cognitive development, and get the students moving around if possible. So when you play the game or you do an activity, a post-reading activity, make sure that it does incorporate an additional reading as well. So if the students are, if you're going to do like a reader's theater or something like that, you can, that's going to require the students to have to reread the story independently. So that third reading, that can be done during the during reading phase, or it can be done as a post-reading activity. As I just mentioned, reader's theater, this is a very, very simple activity that people do because it promotes fluency, it builds confidence. Everybody's familiar with it as a reading activity, but it doesn't always work. It's not always level appropriate. Now, again, for your young learners, the stories are not necessarily well suited for reader's theater. So what you can do is you can adapt the reader's theater format for something that's more level appropriate. Because, as I said, too short, little or no dialogue, or nonfiction, those don't actually work very well for reader's theater. It doesn't help. So you can do something that I call expert reading. And the objective here is that students fully understand a small section of the reading. And this is why this applies for very young learners or higher level learners. You're only going to understand, you want them to know a small section perfectly. This is where they're going to be able to answer all the questions no matter what. You can make the interaction individual, paired, small group, it's up to you. And then for materials, all you need, books, flashcards, that's it. And you maybe don't even need the flashcards. But for younger learners, it's really helpful to have that extra prompt. But they shouldn't be using the books when they're talking, because that defeats the purpose of being an expert. And very simple steps. Step one, have students talk to different experts. So after they have read their section, they're an expert, you've given them time to be experts on their section, which is probably going to be like 1 or 2 sentences. Have them explain what they learned and what they know with another student. So the student talks about their expert section with another student who talks about a different expert section. Use the target sentences that you teach them to do this. Then after that, they'll report to the class on what they've learned and what they, as an expert, and what they've learned from their classmates. You can do things like compare and contrast if it's possible. And then play a game, which again transitions from the reading activity to the workbook activity. So this expert reading, you want to make sure that those specific pieces of information that they have become experts on are in the game, but then that they are also in the comprehension questions. So a very, very simple explanation of this is this story here, face painting. Basically, you're dividing this into simple, small parts. The parts should all be somewhat similar in their framework. I did the whole story here just so you can see it, but if you want to, you can focus on the 3 sentences or that have the same pattern. She paints a tiger face, it is really scary. She paints a cat face, it is really cute. So you can see what the targets are there. So you can see the targets there. You can teach the target sentences and then have the students become experts on what the tiger face does or what the cat face does. So I'm not going to go into great detail about this. You can view it in the PowerPoint after. Yes, Constance, the recording will be available later. And then very, very quickly, just because we're running out of time, we're actually out of time. Other things that you can do, the pizza game. It's a game that I love and I use it all the time. There's an example of it here. You can read the explanations of this. I'm going to skip through it right now because it's a useful game, but it can be used for anything. It's not just for a reading class, but also extensive reading. This is the one that I really want to talk about because extensive reading gets your students to read more outside of class, and they're doing it with different stories. You can give your students a selection of level appropriate books to choose from. Maybe they're related to the story that you read in class, but it shouldn't be the same story in class necessarily. But using extensive reading gets them to keep reading and reading more, which will improve their fluency a great deal. And it gets them more interaction with English and reading outside of class, more than you could provide them as a teacher. And you can do this with eFuture's new on-the-go e-library, which is a USB. So if you have students that don't have internet or the internet isn't great enough for them to access ebooks, you can use a USB device like this, which has the e-library on it. And then they can access it on their phone or a tablet or a computer, even if they don't have an internet connection. So it's really, really useful. So we are a little over time. Sorry about that, but just a quick conclusion here. Things to take away. Remember, read stories multiple times. Use the book comprehension questions as the review for an expansion activity or a game, and then go back to the questions in the book. Reading class is not quiet time. Create speaking opportunities with your activities. Plan your engagement in class and encourage engagement out of class. So be prepared for your class, but then encourage them through things like extensive reading after, so that they continue to engage with reading. And of course, if you have any questions about our products, you can visit our website or you can contact one of our partners. You can see their information for each country. If you don't see your country listed here, you will just contact us at inquiry@eltkorea.com. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for coming. I hope it was helpful. I hope to see you guys again very, very soon. But yeah, by all means, if you want to, if you have to go, you can always email us and contact us with questions. Happy to do that. But yeah, if you don't have any other questions here, we will say goodbye for now. But thank you for being here and being along this ride with me. Sorry, it went a little bit long, but I wanted to get you guys to give me some answers as well. Goodbye to everybody, and thank you very, very much for attending, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.